Okay, so get ready, because today we're diving into some, well, kind of heavy stuff. We're tackling a question that honestly kind of freaks me out a little bit.
Hmm.
Can capitalism, like, actually collapse? Seriously, whoever sent this in, you really like to get into the big questions, don't you? And let me tell you, this article, it goes there, it talks about like all the worst case scenarios,
Yeah.
climate change, running out of resources, pandemics, all that stuff that makes you want to hide under a rock with a year's supply of ramen noodles. But, and this is where things get really interesting, this article, it doesn't just throw out these doomsday scenarios. It actually argues that a sudden collapse of capitalism is unlikely. It says that the system might be tougher than we think. And to help us unpack all of this, we've got our expert on all things economics, history, and how societies change joining us for this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
So I gotta say, one of the things that really struck me about this article was this idea of capitalism as a mental technology. Like, what does that even mean?
Yeah, it's a really interesting way to think about it, right? It's not just about Wall Street or the stock market. It's more like it's a way of thinking about value, about risk, about profit. It's like a skill set,
Right.
or a lens that we see the world through. And here's the thing. Even if, like, all the physical structures of capitalism were to crumble, those ways of thinking, they can stick around. They might be forgotten for a while, but they can always reemerge.
Okay, so it's like I was imagining, I don't know, like some scene from a movie where a bunch of hackers take down the entire financial system. And I'm thinking, well, there goes capitalism.
Yeah.
But you're saying it's not that simple.
Nope, not that simple at all. This article, it really emphasizes how capitalism is way more decentralized than, say, an empire. Like, if you took out the emperor, that whole empire might crumble. But with capitalism, it's more like a network, right? If you cut off one part of the network, the other parts can adapt. They can find new connections.
So, okay, maybe it's not going to disappear overnight. But this whole idea of resource depletion, that still worries me. Like, we hear all the time about how we're using up the planet's resources. Are we going to run out of everything?
Yeah, that's a big concern for a lot of people, and the article gets that. But it also pushes back against this idea that we're definitely going to run out of everything. And here's the even wilder part. It suggests that even if resources do become more limited, capitalism might actually be better at adapting to that than other systems.
Hold on. I'm going to need you to explain that one, because that doesn't seem obvious. How can a system that's all about growth and consuming more stuff thrive in a world where there's less to go around?
Right, right. And that's where this whole mental technology idea becomes really crucial.
Hmm.
Because capitalism, it's not just about using up stuff. It's about problem solving. It's about innovation. It's about finding new ways to create value, even when you've got constraints.
Hmm.
Like, think about it. Capitalism was going strong long before we had things like electricity or widespread oil use,
Yeah,
right?
that's a good point. It's like when you look back in history, some of the most innovative periods came about during times when resources were scarce. Necessity is the mother of invention or whatever.
Exactly. And the article is saying that this ability to innovate, this human ingenuity, it doesn't just go away. So even if some resources do become harder to come by, it's not necessarily game over for capitalism. It could actually spark a whole new wave of creative solutions, a whole new era of adaptation.
So instead of picturing like a Mad Max wasteland,
Hmm.
we should be thinking about how this drive to solve problems, this drive to create value, how those capitalist instincts might play out in a world where resources are more limited.
Absolutely. It might look different, for sure. It
Hmm.
might operate on a different scale.
Mhm.
But those core principles, that adaptability, that's what this article is really getting at.
I'm starting to see why this listener thought this would be a good topic for us. It really makes you rethink those doomsday scenarios, doesn't it? It's like, even if the world changes in a big way, humans, we're pretty good at finding a way forward.
Yeah, we really are. And that historical perspective, it's so important because it reminds us that challenges are a part of life, a part of history, but so is human resilience.
It's funny because this article mentions the Roman Empire, like as an example of a collapse. But then it also says that empires, they're really centralized, right? So they're vulnerable in a way that a decentralized system like capitalism might not be.
Yeah, that's a really key difference. When we talk about collapse, we got to think about the structure of the system. Like, what are its strengths? What are its weaknesses? Empires, they've got this top-down structure. So if you take out the guy at the top,
The whole thing could fall apart.
exactly, capitalism is way more like, a network. You cut off one branch, the others can adapt.
So, okay, maybe capitalism isn't quite as fragile as, I don't know, like a house of cards or something. But here's a thought. Does capitalism even need to be global to survive? Like, what if things get more localized? Can it work on a smaller scale?
That's a really interesting question. And the article actually compares capitalism to socialism here. It suggests that socialism, it might actually be better suited to smaller scale stuff.
Okay.
But with capitalism, it's kind of the opposite. Capitalism, it's historically thrived on these big interconnected markets.
So bigger is better.
Well, not necessarily. It's not that capitalism needs to be global to function. It's
Yeah.
more like that's where it's really done its thing, you know?
Go ahead.
But the article argues that the core principles of capitalism, they don't just disappear when you scale things down.
I'm going to need an example here. I'm picturing like ants trading stocks.
Oh, the article uses the classic example of Robinson Crusoe.
Robinson Crusoe.
Stranded on a desert island.
Right.
Obviously, it's a simplified example.
One dude, an island, a whole lot of coconuts.
Right. But even in that situation, Crusoe, he's still engaging in the basics of capitalism. He's valuing his time, he's managing his resources, he's producing stuff. He might even trade if he got the chance.
So even with no global economy, those instincts are still there. The drive to create, to trade, to problem solve.
Exactly. It's like those instincts are part of that mental technology of capitalism.
It's a trip, right?
It is. And look, the article isn't saying that a world of Robinson Crusoes would be ideal. It's more like even in a completely different world, those core capitalist principles, that resourcefulness, that adaptability, they wouldn't just vanish.
We're hardwired for it or something.
Maybe. We've always faced challenges, right? And we find ways to adapt, to innovate.
So you're saying even if the future is wild, those skills, that mindset, it'll still matter.
I think so. I think that's one of the big takeaways here. We get caught up in these big stories, collapse or no collapse. But the truth is it's going to be way more complicated than that.
For sure.
And understanding those underlying principles, that's what helps us deal with uncertainty. It helps us be a little more optimistic even.
It's really making me think, like what if everything changes?
It's wild, right?
We've been talking about this system, capitalism. It's everywhere. But what if it disappears? So for people listening, what's the takeaway? Is this just like a fun thought experiment? Or is there something we can actually learn from all this?
That's the cool thing about these deep dives. Even if it's a little, intense sometimes, even if capitalism doesn't go away completely, understanding how it could change, how it works when things are tough, that's powerful stuff.
So instead of freaking out about the collapse, we should be thinking about how to deal with a different world. A world where capitalism is different, smaller, maybe with new rules.
Totally. It's like hope for the best,
Right.
but be ready for anything. We don't
Yeah.
have to go full doomsday prepper. But understanding the problems, that's like adding tools to your toolbox.
I like that.
It helps us be more resilient as individuals, as a society.
So be adaptable, be resourceful,
Yeah.
almost like be an entrepreneur in your own life.
Exactly.
That-
That's a great way to put it. This wasn't about saying the world is ending. It was about giving you knowledge, giving you perspective.
Right.
When we understand the how and the why, the history, the pressure points, that's when we can really handle whatever comes next.
I'm into it.
Yeah.
So we talked about a lot. Capitalism in our heads, Robinson Crusoe on his island with his coconuts. But this article, it leaves us with a big question. If capitalism is that adaptable, could it take over the world? Not by force, but just because it works everywhere. It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. And on that note, we're going to leave you with that thought. Go explore, think about it, and as always, happy learning, deep divers.